February 7, 1812, was a man by the name of Charles Dickens. This man would become the most celebrated writer of the Victorian era. After his father's imprisonment due to debts, Dickens began working at a blacking factory. Such exposure to the hardships of the working poor is showcased in his fiction novels such as David Copperfield and Great Expectations. After a career as a reporter, he wrote his first book entitled Sketches by Boz. Great Expectations, published serially from December 1860 to August 1861, was his 13th novel. Before his death of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1870, a novel entitled The Mysteries of Edwin Drood was left incomplete. The protagonist, Pip, is perhaps one of the most complex characters in literary history. He's a dreamer, a Lothario, and a man of great expectations. His parents died before he had the chance to know anything about them, so he illustrates their personalities and appearances based on the figures of their tombstones. He is raised by his sister, Mrs. Joe, who punishes him profusely. The beatings of his sister are meant to instill kindness and compassion in Pip, and to prevent him from acquiring an arrogant and ungrateful personality. His only friend and hero is his brother-in-law, Mr. Joe, who is a local blacksmith. Pip greatly admires Mr. Joe until he meets Miss Havisham and her niece Estella, who are both extremely cruel to him, causing him to feel shame about his life and the people in it. Despite Estella's cruelty towards him, he admires her greatly and will do anything to gain her affections. To gain Estella's love, Pip feels he must become a proper gentleman and abandon his predestined future of becoming a blacksmith like Mr. Joe. His pleas are answered with the aid of a mysterious and, at the time, unknown benefactor. Pip jumps the chance to become a gentleman in London's high society without looking back. He will come into a very handsome property and therefore has great expectations. The first is to always keep the name of Pip, and the other is not to ask about the identity of his benefactor. Upon hearing this news, he is treated with the utmost respect from the townspeople. Pip ignores Mr. Joe's sadness and is angry with him for not being genuinely happy for his new fortune. While living amongst the high society, Pip transforms into a bitter and snobbish person. He treats his servants with no respect whatsoever, and feels anger towards Mr. Joe, his former hero, when he comes to visit and is so obviously out of place in Pip's new world. Pip expects to marry Estella, but his expectations are derailed when he discovers that her heart belongs to another. Only when deciding to give up on his numerous expectations does Pip return to the person he was as a child, a sweet-mannered and humble character. Great Expectations is a first-person narrative told by Pip. The entire novel seems to be the memoirs he writes as a 50-year-old man. The fact that the narrator already knows all of the events of his life makes for plentiful foreshadowing throughout. The reader has a clear picture of Pip's surroundings and the innermost workings of his mind, but the reader lacks insight into the minds of others. Personally, I prefer first-person narratives because I'll develop a deep understanding and concern of the outcome of the narrator and the other characters most dear to him or her. The genre of Great Expectations is difficult to determine due to the fact that its contents can be related to almost any literary genre. Pip's unrequited love for Estella may classify this novel as a romance, but the descriptions of the occurrences at the house of Miss Havisham most definitely classify the novel as Gothic fiction. I categorize the story as coming of age because the protagonist, Pip, enters adulthood through the experience and knowledge he obtains on his journey which we witness whilst reading the novel. I have come to the conclusion that the theme of Great Expectations is that one will not be truly happy until he or she refuses to acknowledge the ridicules received by other people. Pip lost his childlike innocence when he was introduced to a society based on the person's station in life. This introduction led Pip to encounter a habit of self-consciousness and, ultimately, denial of his self. Only when Pip regains his oblivion to the ridicules of others does he regain his innocence. A quote that, in my opinion, clearly makes the theme known is, "Finally, I remember that when I got into my little bedroom, I was truly wretched, and had a strong conviction that I should never like Joe's trade. I had liked it once, but once was not now." This quote expresses Pip's deep acknowledgement for the opinions of Estella and Miss Havisham. Their opinions of Pip outweighed Pip's thoughts of himself. Because of this, his former hero was now disgraceful in his eyes. Though this novel isn't at all fast-paced, nor targeted for a teen audience, I've grown quite fond of it over the course of time I've spent engrossed in its pages. This novel triggered a change in my outlook on life and way of thinking. This book is definitely not for everyone, but I guarantee that this novel will have a great impact on whoever examines the contents of its brilliantly written pages.